So in order to start this discussion, I will actually make a few general comments because I don't want to be judgmental, but I do want to throw the gauntlet down. The first comment I'll make, and this is for the wider world to hear, is that we in Africa do understand the impact of global warming. We actually feel it every day, more so than in other parts of the world. And therefore, it is our turn to applaud the wider world that they seem to have realized the follies of their ways so far. Because the global warming that we are trying to fix for a change wasn't created in Africa. However, where we see the challenge is the issue that we, whilst have not been responsible for the emissions, seems to be getting a disproportionately negative effect coming out of it. It's not my general rule when I speak in a panel to look at my notes, but I actually am going to read out a couple of quotes just to kind of buttress the point that I'm trying to make here before I hand over to the panelists. Today, what we are seeing is that capital has disappeared when it comes to investing in fossil fuels. We see pledges made on climate funding not being delivered on. And what we also see is the opportunistic swings, if you like, and the duplicity about how the world is looking at transition. And the reason I say all this, and this is a matter of record, it's not me saying it. Do you guys know that global banks, after having made all those promises 6 or 7 years back, in aggregate, have funded up to $5 trillion into fossil fuel investments? That's after having made the promises they made in Paris. The world's largest asset manager, BlackRock, has actually blocked proposals as of last week to stop financing fossil fuel companies. They blocked those proposals. Citibank's chief executive officer is on record saying it is not feasible to shut down the fossil fuel economy. Yet, we see the impact that is facing us today in Africa in terms of the capital having dried up. On that note, I want to come ask Carlos, the academician, the thinker, the philosopher, the advisor to many governments. We poor people here, what are we going to do about this, Carlos? How are we going to make sense in what is happening in the wider world when it comes to dealing with funding fossil fuels and what have you? How do we deal with this? How do we get clarity in this?
Well, for starters, let's say that if we want to have a good lunch, we have first to admit that we have won the battle for net zero, because the continent that is the closest to net zero is Africa.
Correct.
That is not acknowledged. It's of course net zero by default, not because we industrialize, not because we develop, but it's also because we allowed others to do so with our resources. So we are still living in a colonial model with basically commodity dependence. That commodity dependence is responsible for 80% of our exports in the continent, and this is not changing significantly without us embracing this opportunity that is the climate transition. But the climate transition has to be, as many say, a just transition. What the problem we face is that just transition is defined, like many other things, not by Africans, not by those who suffer the most, but by those who have the power of actually influencing policy, but also influencing public opinion. So you end up with this situation that is quite paradoxical. We have currently in the continent a situation of extreme weather and parts of Africa with an increase in degrees above 1.5%. People forget that when you talk about 1.5% is about the average, it's not about every single place. And to get to that average, those who suffer the most are the Africans, and we are seeing it. And yet, every single promise that has been made on climate finance has not been met. My calculation is that we are about 1 trillion deficit in relation to what has been promised. 1 trillion. And this is just going to grow because we have been, lured into a negotiating tactic where we basically go there to ask for money against some commitment. But in fact, what we are missing is that the negotiation is not about that money, it's about the standard setting, it's about the certification, it's about the definitions, it's about the entire ecosystem that is emerging out of these negotiations that we are not controlling. And I'll just give one example to end my argument. The current discussion is about carbon border adjustment mechanism. How Europeans are going to tax for carbon intensity their imports. And they are saying they are not making any exceptions, which means there are no exceptions for Africa. Since most of our exports are either fossil fuels or carbon intensive still, we are going to pay a huge price out of this definition that apparently is good for the planet. The problem is that it is good for the planet for some part of the planet, not for other parts of the planet. And we have to wake up for this type of very refined, sophisticated type of negotiations that are getting us into a trap, and we will not get out of the trap if we just keep asking for money like charity.
Thank you, Carlos. What you're saying is what's good for the goose has got to be good for the gander as well, and that's not happening. Let me come to you, Mr. Chiari. In your role as the Group MD of NNPC, you represent not only one of the largest resources of oil and gas on the continent, but you also represent, in a way, the aspiration and hopes of many, including obviously 220 million Nigerians. How are we going to balance this global narrative vis-a-vis the need we have at a domestic level, at a regional level, to be able to fund our own development? How are we going to manage this?
Thank you very much, Mr. Gupta, and thank you for the opportunity to speak here. First of all, I think we will miss the point if we don't recognize that there is an abject energy poverty in Africa. And you'll see the reflection of that everywhere. I'm sure as you're coming in here, you must have seen fuel queues outside. It just tells you the level of poverty of energy that we have in the country. Very thin supply chain disruption can just cause a problem in any country, just like our own, that you can see here. And having said this, you will see that energy transition is not about stopping hydrocarbons. No, it's not about stopping fossil fuel. We're going to get carbon neutral. The meaning of this is that we're going to have cleaner use of hydrocarbon so that ultimately the impact on the environment will be minimal. And coming to the context that he brought up, yes, in Africa, our contribution probably 3-4% of the maximum carbon emission. That's very true. But we're a very resource-dependent continent. And for Nigeria, for instance, we have over 200 billion barrels of oil reserve, over 203 proven gas reserve, and potentially up to 600 trillion scope of gas. So this can actually fuel and fire Africa. And that's the meaning of this. And there's very little we can do rather than to first of all address the energy poverty challenge that we have, which means that we have to transit gradually. The world has accepted that gas is the transition fuel of choice. And that as we move towards a carbon neutral situation, that we do need to develop it so that we can create those energy requirements that we're in. So as a country, of course, they are very clear that NMP is the largest oil and gas company in the continent. We are the biggest corporation in the continent. We're going to become a fully private company in a month or two time. And the meaning of all this is that you have an opportunity to use this huge company to provide energy and close the energy gap in Africa in all its sense. And ultimately, of course, sorting out the local problems, domestic problems. Yes, we do have plans. It is working. It's work in progress. And I think that the key in Africa must focus on today is to seek financing for gas in the first instance, and also we also create wealth from the liquids. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. I think that is the exact sort of view, if you like, or the position that producers like yourselves need to take, because I think Carlos made a very interesting comment in one of the earlier sessions where he said that it's not about just transition, it's about climate justice. That's the word you use. So we all kind of know that the existential crisis of the energy deficit in Africa is not going to be solved overnight by renewables alone. Let me come to you, sir, Mr. Shinobi. Where do you then see private sector in particular, but gas as a way of balancing the complicated expectations that is being put on us?
Thank you very much. And I want to thank AFC for this opportunity for all of us to express ourselves and educate ourselves. First of all, I would like to explain something. I mean, let me just pick from what the GMD had talked about earlier when he said energy poverty. Today in the Sahara Group, I mean, 1 in 5 times if you do not have light in Nigeria, it's our fault. We generate 20% of the power to Nigeria and distribute 15%. But beyond that, you know, when we say gas as a solution, you know, everyone's talking about transformation, and I always say to exist, the first thing any business entity or organization wants is to first survive. For us, ambidextrity is a key thing. How do we first keep ourselves alive? How do we then generate funds? How do we then transform the organization to where we want to go to? I mean, the model we use is simply that of, to ensure we get to transformation, we must first of all ensure that performance is ongoing, then we bring in the reforms, and then of course we start to do all the information and all the other things, but the end goal is that the organization must be alive. Now, in terms of gas, where we have the gas issues, gas, if you look at Africa as a continent, in the next 15 years, 40% will be our increase in terms of power demand. The rest of the world is about 10%. GMD has already told you what we have in Nigeria in terms of gas that can fuel the whole of Africa. But, and I say but, we always need base load in power. Gas represents this base load. So whether we like it or not, the gas molecules will not just be for energy, electricity, but also for all the various industrial developments. And I think gas is a key play. Gas is cleaner, of course, than the other fossil fuels, and gas is available whether it's in Mozambique, whether it's in Tanzania, in East Africa, or even in Nigeria and Senegal. And Samuel will tell you the amount of huge discoveries they recently at least found in Senegal. Thank you.
No, so before I come to you, and we do want to sort of continue with this theme, but I just want the audience to appreciate that whilst we are actually fighting for gas, do you know the rest of the world is still burning a lot of coal? The US alone increased its coal production 2021 by 7% and is projected to increase it by another 5% in 2022. UK, Italy, India, they have cranked up their coal power stations just to meet the energy crisis. In fact, one of the classiest quotes that I picked up recently was from this gentleman who is the EU's climate chief. And given everything that's happening geopolitically, he said that countries can burn coal as an alternative to Russian gas. and still meet the EU's emissions targets. This is not me saying it, ladies and gentlemen. This is the EU climate chief. Mr. Sarr, yes. Please tell us what's happening in Senegal. I know that you guys have lots of gas, but you're also looking at other hybrid solutions. Please tell us.
Yes, thank you very much, Gupta. Thank you very much for AFC to invite us here. As Tope said, why I'm very happy, because he's my fuel and gas supplier, Sarah Energy. I'm very happy for him to be here. Anyway, as you rightly say, today's Senegal energy sector is dominated by the HFO and the LFO. But with the discovery of gas in Senegal, the government of Senegal planned to the transition to use it for gas for power, for all base load. And today, with the support, full support, where I said, of AFC, we are building, as a West African Energy, a 366 power plant, which will be to support this vision. And it's under construction. Inshallah, we'll be putting the first fire in November 2022. This plant will displace significantly, as I said, all this emission that we're talking about, and we'll launch Senegal into gas power. We are also developing West African Energy, but on behalf of other groups, another 250 and another 300, to tell you that Senegal is on the gas transition. And as the President of Republic of Senegal, Macky Sall, said it in the UN General Assembly, he went and defended, together with the President Buhari, this vision. Senegal is also, as you said, we are also in the wind, we are also in other renewable, but we are going for base load with gas, together with the help of AFC, thanks to AFC and Afreximbank for the supporting of the financing that they're giving us.
Thank you. Carlos, I want to move to you quickly, because I think generally, the question that we all have in the uppermost sort of parts of our mind is this whole development agenda being hijacked at the altar of the renewable agenda, right? And we heard earlier from the DRC finance minister about the role of battery minerals. And I think you touched on it as well, that there is a real opportunity for the continent to unite and create a quid pro quo around what we do with our battery minerals vis-a-vis the renewable agenda. Can you tell the audience a little more how we should approach this and why this could be our biggest opportunity?
Yes, I think in the morning sessions, we had a lot of discussions about the risk premium associated with Africa. And part of it is due to a number of very important indicators that are used by rating agencies and other investors. And I think it's important for us to acknowledge that we are going to face a world where this type of indicators are going to move more and more into green considerations. Now, the greener considerations are not necessarily fair, and they are going to be done in such a way that I think a lot of it can be greenwashing rather than actually transforming, like your quote about the EU climate chief. And I think it's important for us to play geopolitics the same way as other regions play, which is we have to define our needs. That's precisely what the AFC paper does, white paper does. We have to define our needs, and when we look into the development needs of Africa, we can see that the energy transition is going to play the most important financing role. It's going to be the biggest part of the development finance needs of the continent in the near future. So we have to get it right, and getting it right means that we have to have a short, medium, and long-term strategy. The short-term strategy is how we get out of coal, I would say, because that is really urgent. It's not in our benefit. And it's going to be something that is more riskier than any other type of investment. But, countries like South Africa depend heavily on coal, and, it's not easy just to transition out of it. It requires a lot of financing. The medium strategy is gas. And the long-term strategy obviously is counting on technological innovation that is going to bring us other forms of base load, but also, the storage, dimensions that are going to evolve quite significantly. I can expect that by the middle of this decade, we will see a lot of improvements in the way we are going to deal with such type of investment. So for a country that is now going to do investments on energy for its development, it has to see in the reverse order. Whatever is possible for the long term, fine. What is not possible, you have to go to the medium. Okay. And what is even more difficult, you still have to consider the short term. You cannot just, erase and say we are going to do all just, the new forms of renewable energy that are sort of fashionable. Because we always had a very mature knowledge of how to make cost competitive investments on renewable. But those were geothermal and hydro. What we are now becoming more exposed to is this fashion about solar and wind. But in fact, we have to combine all these different elements into the matrix.
So Carlos, it's the art of the possible. We have to be practical, and we have to see how we get there, and we cannot fast forward.
And it's geopolitical.
And geopolitical, of course. Mr. Gary, I want to come to you because you heard what Carlos said about the art of the possible, the need for a coalition, the need for a hybrid or a balanced approach, the need for sovereigns to be able to balance their books, etc., etc. Very quickly, sir, given the wider hat that you do wear, how do you see the developing nations forming a front to be able to confront this rather irrational expectation?
Maybe not necessarily irrational. I had the privilege of being at COP 2026, and there is a frontal approach by African countries to say that there must be energy justice. This transition is not coming from the blues. We have different contribution to the current crisis, but more importantly, there must be a gradual transition in such a way that we address Africa's energy deficiency and poverty, and ultimately also arriving at the net carbon zero situation by 2050, 2060. That was the approach of all African countries. It was a very collective position, and that what it means is that yes, we agree that there is an emission problem, but we absolutely cannot move at the pace that others are doing, and our contribution is absolutely not the same thing. There is a clear poverty that we need to address today as we transit. So having said this, what African countries can do today is, first of all, to insist that there must be energy justice. And you all accept this, and the current geopolitical realities, which my colleague here has just pointed out, had brought that also on the table, that there must be a different approach to the same problem that we're facing. So yes, by default, this will happen, because first, today, the world needs the energy resources, the fossil fuel resources that we have today. The world has recognized today that gas is green, and that gas is a transition fuel. So nobody's saying that fossil fuel in the form of gas is any longer the major problem of the world. And nobody's also saying that by 2050, there will be zero production of hydrocarbon. So in that manner, when you look at it, for us in Africa, is to insist that we must generate the energy that we require today. There must be a different time scale. There must be a different focus, and more importantly, we need to cooperate among ourselves to make sure that we address that energy poverty, which is very simple, as we're already doing in Nigeria. We're creating the Nigeria Trans-West Africa into Morocco gas pipeline, so that we can link all the countries and also bring in the gas from Senegal into the pipeline so that we can support ourselves. But there's still enough resources, more resources that we can handle, and that this conversation can actually be taken forward in a manner that the rest of Africa can benefit from the resources that we have. And I'm aware also that next week, APO is meeting in Luanda, and part of it is how can we integrate our infrastructure so that costs can be lower, so that we can support and help each other, and that insist that the world must finance this. And of course, we have a very good platform for doing this, the AFC. Thank you.
Thank you. We're running out of time. Mr. Shonebi, and then Mr. Shah will wrap up with you. Quickly, one comment I heard, that net zero is not necessarily net zero fossil fuel. the two are distinctly two different terms, if you think of it. But final comments from you, sir.
Okay, for African explanations, we must always give African stories. So I'll make this quick. Mama Ekpeyong, sitting down in the village, and she's cooking with her firewood. And somebody comes to her and tells her energy transition, energy this, energy that. First of all, communication, zero. Secondly, poverty, as has been said, high, because she has no other source of living. She sells the firewood and she needs it for cooking. Now, for us to achieve everything you said, I mean, of course, it will never be zero. Carlos had said a lot of what we call today in Nigeria, we call it washing, but of course there's a lot of greenwashing, but I would say we need to communicate appropriately. Because that feeling of getting to zero and actually being at zero are two different things. And what the world has mastered today is making people feel they are at the zero, but the zero is relative. You just gave us examples now. I mean, we've seen a lot of turnarounds after the Ukraine incidents and other things. So necessity is the mother of invention, and whoever is desperate will do what he needs to do before he starts to think of what makes him comfortable. You mentioned, for the last thing, you mentioned, or someone was talking about the South African example, and I said, a while back I read something where the South African minister had said, I would rather burn my coal in a lit up environment than keep my people in the dark in a clean environment.
Yep, we can only swim after we learn to float, pretty much. Mr. Sar, the onerous responsibility is now yours to finish before we have lunch, so the audience can blame you.
Anyway, just to endorse, first of all, we have all to endorse the document that AFC has produced, and that is very important. As I said, the President of the Republic of Senegal, who happened to be also the President of EU, has endorsed it and want to endorse it with order, and believe on our leaders, because I believe today our political leaders, the head of state, are defending all those positions. And also believe, as my case, the case in Senegal, I do believe that here in Africa, we can develop it on ourselves. We have African banks who finance us. West African Energy is a fully Senegalese shareholder, and we have an African fuel supplier. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.